Chapter 23. For almost an hour, Jenna had been watching Amy and trying to get up the courage to speak to her. Even now, in broad daylight, surrounded by all her friends at the pool, she was having difficulty separating the Amy who appeared in her dreams with the person who, less than 100 feet away, was rummaging through a purple paisley tote bag. Andrea, toweling her wet hair, sat next to Jenna. Jenna had not told her anything about what she had found out the night before, and now, watching her friend dry her hair, without even once taking her eyes off Michael Mackenzie, Jenna knew she had done the right thing. Almost all of their friends were at the pool that morning, although Jason was noticeably absent. It was Labor Day weekend, and the pool would be closed after Monday. Jenna knew full well how Andrea and the others would react if she suddenly got up and walked over to where Amy sat. She thought of calling Amy at home and talking to her on the phone, but somehow that seemed too impersonal, given what she wanted to ask her. She thought of meeting Amy somewhere, the mall perhaps, but then she'd have to wait even longer to talk to her, and she'd already waited a whole sleepless night. Why did everyone have to treat Amy like a pariah anyway? It was so stupid. She didn't seem at all like the person who was the butt of so many vicious rumors and jokes. She'd never been anything but kind as far as Jenna could tell. Fine, let them think what they want, Jenna decided, getting to her feet, and without saying a word to Andrea or the others, she simply marched right over to Amy and sat down on the edge of her beach towel. Amy was reading a magazine, but she closed it, letting it rest on her thighs when Jenna sat down. Jenna already knew what she was going to say, something she should have said weeks ago. I wanted to thank you for your letter. Amy tossed the magazine on the grass next to her. 2 dark smudges remained on her thighs where the ink from the back page had stuck to the suntan oil. I thought it might help. It did. Jenna felt awkward. She wasn't at all sure what to say next. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry about what happened to your parents. Amy rubbed at the inky spots on her legs. That was a long time ago. I guess it really never stops hurting, though. Amy's smile was sympathetic. Maybe it does for some people. She brushed her hair away from her face. I think the hardest part for me was the guilt. Guilt? Jenna felt a strange tingling throughout her body. She recognized the prickly sensation that preceded the panicky feeling she had usually had around Jason. Yes, guilt, Amy said. For a long time I felt guilty about being the one who survived. When Jenna looked confused, Amy added, I was in the car when they had the accident. Jenna shook her head but never once took her eyes from Amy's. She wanted to say something, to give something back for the letter Amy had written her, but there didn't seem to be anything she could say, nothing that wouldn't sound empty and stupid. The conversation was growing more and more difficult, leading to places Jenna did not want to go. She tried to focus her attention on something else. Out of the corner of her eye, Jenna saw Andrea staring at her, her lips parted in surprise. Her eyes were wide with disapproval. Jenna shifted her body so that she wouldn't have to see what was going on behind her back. She needed to change the subject. She wanted to ask about Joe Sadowsky, but she wasn't at all sure how to go about it. Amy seemed to be waiting. I was wondering, Jenna asked cautiously. That night at Judd Passarello's party, this guy seemed to be harassing you. I saw you in the dining room with him. She hesitated. Was that Joe Sadowsky? Amy didn't answer right away. She seemed to be concentrating hard on something. Do you know him? Jenna said, No, but I've heard a few things. Amy licked her lips and folded her arms around her raised knees. What kind of things? This was going all wrong. Amy was not answering her questions. Instead, she was asking questions, questions Jenna had no answers for. She switched tactics. He's a friend of Michael Mackenzie's, right? She tilted on her head toward Michael's lifeguard stand. When she said this, only to meet his gaze head on, he was not wearing his sunglasses, and she could see that he was looking right at them. And not just a casual glance. He was staring openly. Did he sense they were talking about him? Amy had been looking in the same direction. Now she took a deep breath. You know Michael? Not personally. Jenna suddenly remembered Amy standing in the front doorway at Judd Passarello's party watching her. I only talked to him once, she added. Amy got to her feet. She tossed her magazine into the tote bag and began gathering up her other things. I have to go, she said. The sunlight glinting off the pool water had begun to hurt Jenna's eyes. Her sunglasses were back on her towel. She shaded her eyes with her hand, looking up at Amy. Amy was leaving, and she hadn't answered a single question. Jenna was so frustrated she thought she might cry. She stood, picked up the beach towel, and handed it to Amy. Amy didn't bother to fold it. She simply bunched it into a ball and stuffed it in her bag. Then she surprised Jenna by putting her hand on Jenna's shoulder. Jenna was suddenly reminded of her dream. You think Joe had something to do with your father's death, don't you?" Jenna's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know," she whispered. "I guess by now everyone in town knows he's a potential suspect," Amy said. "It's no secret." Jenna wasn't sure she could bring herself to ask the next question. Amy was watching her, and Jenna knew from the look on her face that she had already anticipated what Jenna would say. Before Jenna even opened her mouth, Amy simply said, "No, I don't think he did it." Then she turned to leave, the tote bag bouncing gently against her hip. When she had gone only a few steps, she stopped and looked back at Jenna. "I'm sorry I wasn't more help." Jenna watched her walk away. Amy had been her last chance at getting some answers, and those answers were there. She had sensed it. Amy had not been totally open with her. Jenna could see it in her eyes. She wished that she had thought to ask Amy if she had ever heard of the ghost tree and if she had ever dreamt about it. Now it was too late. Disappointed, she started back to her towel, and when she glanced over at Michael Mackenzie, she was startled to discover that he was still watching her. Even from where she stood, she could see deep creases in his forehead. He was obviously disturbed about something.